In this video, we're going to answer the question, what is AF Microadjustment, and also, why is it probably going to be non-existent in a few years? Let's go. So firstly, what is AF Microadjustment? Basically, this is a way of fine-tuning the autofocus in DSLR cameras to correct for front and back focusing. Now, to understand why we need this microadjustment, we first need to understand how DSLRs autofocus. So obviously the camera has a sensor that is going to capture the image, but in DSLRs, in front of that sensor, you have a mirror that is angled backwards at about 45 degrees. This mirror is used to reflect the light upwards into the optical viewfinder, and this allows us to see what is happening through the lens so that we can compose our image. Now, in the viewfinder, you will see your little autofocus points, but the camera's not using the viewfinder to autofocus. It's actually using a separate AF chip that's located at the bottom of the camera. So behind the primary mirror, we actually have a secondary mirror that is perpendicular to it. So it's angled 45 degrees down. So in fact, only most of the light is reflected up into the viewfinder. Some of the light passes through the first mirror and is reflected down onto the autofocus chip. This is actually what the camera will use to acquire focus. Once the camera has acquired focus and you fully press the shutter, the mirror is moved out of the way and the light then travels straight to the sensor where it creates the image. So when the camera is focusing, it's adjusting the path of light until the AF chip sees the picture sharp how it wants it to be. So essentially, in a very simplified way, if you imagine the focusing is two lines of light. Now, where the two lines of light converge is where the camera is focused. So the AF chip is going to keep moving the focus until those light lines converge perfectly onto the chip itself. That way it knows that that's when the picture is in focus. Now the picture can be taken. Now, in an ideal world, the distance that the light has to travel to hit the AF chip should be exactly the same distance as it travels to hit the sensor itself. So when the lens is projecting the light lines onto the AF chip perfectly in focus, the mirror's moved out the way, those light lines are still going to converge perfectly on the sensor, and thus we would get a completely sharp image. However, this is not an ideal world that we live in, and manufacturing cameras, much like anything else, comes under certain tolerances. So there are margins of error that manufacturers deem acceptable. Now, these margins could be fractions of a percentage, but it still opens up a degree of imperfections in the way the cameras are built. Now, you might not even notice these imperfections, you know. Your sensor might be fractionally too far forward or fractionally too far away. You might not even see the difference. Now, it could be that your sensor's too close, but still within tolerance, and your AF chip is actually too far away, but still within tolerance. Now, what's going to happen here is the AF chip's going to adjust the lens so that it thinks the picture's in focus, but when you move the mirror out the way, the light path, the distance the light has to travel, is actually shorter than it's supposed to be. So the light lines are actually going to hit the sensor before they've properly converged. This is going to create what appears to be a slightly out of focused image. So the idea with AF microadjustment is that it allows you to dial in an amount of correction to compensate for these slight inaccuracies. So if all of your images are constantly slightly front focused, you can dial in a certain number of points of back focusing to compensate. Essentially, what you're saying to your camera is, I want you to autofocus to the point where the AF chip thinks it's in focus, and then I want you to go this little bit further. And then that means that the sensor itself is actually going to see the image in focus. And fundamentally, that's what you want. You want the sensor to see things in focus because that's what's capturing the image. Now, this is only a case in DSLRs. You don't need AF microadjustment in mirrorless because The reason that DSLRs have AF microadjustment is because it's using a separate AF chip to autofocus from the sensor itself. With a mirrorless camera, the sensor is the AF chip. It's one and the same. Now, some Sony users might have noticed that there is actually an AF microadjustment option in the A series cameras. But you can only actually access this feature if you are converting A-mount lenses to E-mount bodies using the Sony LAEA4 adapter. If you try accessing that function using E-mount lenses or adapting other lenses to the E-mount body using, the MC11 adapter or a Comlight adapter or any other adapter, it will not allow you to access it because in all of those cases, it's still the camera that's autofocusing itself. Now, with the LAEA4 adapter, however, there's actually a semi-translucent mirror and an autofocus chip built into the adapter itself. So it's the adapter that tells the camera how to change the autofocus. So that's why it needs AF microadjustment, because we've then reintroduced a separate AF chip to the sensor itself. So you then reintroduce that potential misalignment. With all other mirrorless cameras, however, they use the sensor itself, not a separate AF chip, so you no longer need microadjustment. You can test this theory yourself even using a DSLR, as I'm about to demonstrate here. Because if you focus using the live view of a DSLR, it doesn't matter how much in what direction you set the microadjustment to compensate. It doesn't matter whether you set extreme front focus or extreme back focus. If the sensor itself is doing the focusing, the camera is just going to move the focus until it sees a sharp image, and then it can take the picture. So AF microadjustment is only to use when the camera is using a separate AF module from the sensor itself, just to correct for these possible manufacturing imperfections. So that's it for this video. Hope it was of some help to you. If you have any questions or queries, comment box is down below as always. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.